What's up everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Ryan Becker, and every week I drop a new video where I talk about absurd issues in religion, culture, and society. Today's absurdity: segregated conferences in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Before we continue, make sure to click that subscribe button and like this video to help me grow this channel. Now, my particular faith expression is Seventh-day Adventism, which is a Protestant Christian denomination. So if you aren't Adventist, you're welcome to stick around, but you may want to check out my other videos, as this one will be all about Adventism. I love the Adventist Church, and I am a committed Seventh-day Adventist. And that very love and commitment compels me to address very real issues that we need to deal with. So leave a comment down below. What's something that you think needs to change before we can desegregate conferences? Amidst all the racial turmoil happening in the US, many Adventists are asking if it's time to desegregate the conferences, thus reuniting black and white conferences. In this video, I'll be answering that question, and at the end, I'll link to some great resources to better understand the history of Black Seventh-day Adventism. Now, let's get started with some background. A petition has been making the rounds over the last 2 weeks that calls for the end of segregated conferences in Adventism. And more specifically, it calls for denominational unity. For those who are unaware, there are 9 regional conferences in the North American division that overlap with several state conferences. These conferences were established in order for Black Adventists to have conferences that were led by Black people and would work for the advancement of work within the Black Adventist community. There were voices calling for Black Adventists to separate throughout the early 1900s, with several prominent Black pastors and preachers leaving the church in order to encourage Black Adventists to create their own space. But the major push came after Lucille Bayard's death in 1943, when she was denied entry into the Washington Sanitarium because she was Black. She would die 38 days later in a different hospital 6 miles away. The outcry following Bayard's death led to the creation of the Committee for the Advancement of Worldwide Work among Colored Seventh-day Adventists. This committee would work for and eventually secure approval for separate conferences less than a year later at the 1944 GC Executive Committee spring meetings. These conferences also have resulted in increased representation at union and division constituency sessions, as well as in GC Executive Committee and at GC session. And there's far more to this origin story than what I've shared here, but for brevity's sake, I've kept it short. One thing that needs to be made clear: segregated conferences are not segregated because white Adventists told them to do so, or because they passed policies which demanded separation. Black Adventists asked for their own conferences because of a history of unequal and unfair treatment from white Adventists, leaving them with no choice but to demand space for themselves to manage their own interests. So, while Black Adventists asked for their own conferences, it was only because it was abundantly clear to them that there was no safe place for them in the current structure. So now, in 2020, is it time to end the segregated conference structure, bringing everyone together again? While ideally we would have no need for separate conferences, the reality is still much different. Currently, I'm not for desegregation if things stay the way they are. But I am going to list off some things for you to consider as you decide for yourself whether you support reunification or not. Number 1, reintegration into state conferences would split and reduce Black Adventist representation in constituency sessions. When people say they want to end segregated conferences, which conferences they assume will have to change reveals a lot about their beliefs. The prevailing narrative and assumption is that regional conferences should be absorbed into state conferences, so I will address that. Because regional conferences extend across state lines, if regional conferences are absorbed into state conferences, they would be literally split up. Think gerrymandering, but for conferences instead of the US government. Instead of being able to have the voice and authority to make decisions that impact the Black community, this means that Black Adventists would automatically become a minority in conference constituencies, as there would literally be less Black Adventist representation. Right now, segregated conferences allow for Black Adventists to have authority and agency in their own conferences, and other Adventists have authority and agency in state conferences, while both are still able to come together in unity for union and division level matters. This creates a more balanced and fair power dynamic between conferences. But if desegregation happens in this way, a new unequal power dynamic would be created, as Black people give up representation while others maintain the decision-making power that they've always been used to. Number 2, who gives up leadership? If conferences combine, there can't be 2 conference presidents. This is true for many conference leadership positions, so who do we expect to step down? We could hold entirely new constituency sessions in order to select new leadership, but if we do that, Black Adventists will suddenly have become a minority again as a part of that new constituency. This means that Black Adventists won't be able to select leaders like they've been able to for over 70 years, since now they would be outvoted. Reintegration will, as things stand now, naturally result in Black Adventist voices becoming a minority in their own constituency, which means that they would likely also face faced increased underrepresentation at every level of leadership. Number 3, segregated conferences are evidence of a deeper problem, not the problem themselves. Currently, many white Americans claim that racism isn't as significant of an issue anymore because of things like the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Many use the civil rights movement to minimize or dismiss current racial issues because we already took care of it all. It's likely that if we seek to reunify conferences in the North American division, the move would be used as a tool to dismiss legitimate concerns of people of color because we will have already dealt with racism by desegregating. In fact, I have heard this exact sentiment from Adventists in other countries who believe that they don't have any issues with racism because they don't have segregated conferences. Segregated conferences are not the problem. They are evidence of racism elsewhere in Adventism, not the racism itself. If we reunify conferences without addressing the issues of racism among Adventists, we will only empower people to sweep the real problems under the rug and pretend they don't exist. You might think, well, we've come a long way, and we aren't the same as we were 70 to 100 years ago. And that brings me to my next point. There are several ways in which Adventists have perpetuated prejudiced behavior and beliefs. Here's just one example. Number 4, popular teachings about music and worship in Adventism have led to the demonization of black expressions of worship. One major thing that would still be true if conferences unify is that black churches would still be black churches and traditionally white churches would stay white. What I'm about to say is not an opinion, it's a logical conclusion. The phenomenon of white flight also applies here, but I'm going to talk about something more specific. Throughout its history, prominent leaders within Adventism have demonized worship that utilizes things like drums, syncopated beats, cultural movement, and more.
Syncopation, by all occult experts around the world, agree syncopation is the source of occult power in pagan worship services.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And yes, we have literally demonized these things, as many teach that those things directly open people up to demon possession. And while, to my knowledge, it was never explicitly stated that this was to demonize black worship expression, it just so happens that many cultures within the black community have strong historical roots in these very elements of worship. As a result, rejecting these styles of worship and music leads many to, by default, rejecting genuine Black Adventist worship as unchristian or even straight up demonic. In the case of bringing churches together, many Adventists would not voluntarily unify unless those black churches that utilize these styles of worship give that up and worship as they do instead. Ironically enough, it just so happens that the typical approved worship styles are Eurocentric and traditionally white with white cultural heritage. It would quite literally be gentrification of worship. If black worship styles are seen as dangerous or damaging, then many Black Adventists will be forced to change and reject their cultural heritage for the sake of unity, while those demanding that they change will have to compromise nothing except space in their pews. You can actually see this now through multicultural worship services, which are usually nothing more than an added cajon while we all sing early 2000s contemporary Christian hits like How Great Is Our God, or we whip out Days of Elijah for its alternative melody. Unfortunately, when I have seen full Black Adventist worship expressions in traditionally white churches, I have personally watched white people walk out mid-service and never return. As I said, white flight is real. While there aren't many outright stating that Black Adventist worship culture is bad, these teachings lead to their condemnation. Number 5. Why wait until desegregation to partner together? Currently, there are very few state conference and regional conference churches in the same location that partner together for ministry. Many falsely believe that desegregation would lead to increased partnership, but in reality, the only thing stopping that partnership now is ourselves. If we can't partner together now because of our differences, then removing a conference title wouldn't change anything. The bottom line is, we don't partner now because we don't want to. This fact alone is strong evidence that segregation isn't actually the issue. We can partner together now, work alongside one another, and begin to work out many of the cultural misunderstandings and differences that lead to regional conferences still being necessary. We give the conference affiliation way too much power in how we relate to one another. If we truly believe that we should partner together and unite, then there's nothing stopping us from doing that now except ourselves. What makes us think that being in the same conference will suddenly change anything, if being in the same city doesn't change anything now? Number 6. Reunification is a constituency decision, not a leadership one. The decision for desegregation can only come through conference constituency sessions, so the only thing we can call on leaders to do is put it on the agenda and lobby for it from their position. But no leaders or committees at any level have the power to disband or change conference structure without there being heinous policy violations and rebellion against the denomination from within that conference. This means that if all 5 prior considerations are true, then calling for desegregation as a means to end racism without any of those problems being solved or even officially addressed is calling for Black people to willfully vote to become minorities in their conferences, give up leadership roles, give up many ancestral and cultural expressions of worship, and assimilate back into traditionally white majority spaces. Which leads to my final point. Number 7. But the world sees us as racist. The call for desegregation is usually done from a place of good intentions, wanting to see the Adventist Church do away with racism. But if we ask Black Adventists to give up their representation, seats of leadership, agency, and culture just because of how it looks to outsiders, then we are saying that we care more about the appearance of racism than we do about whether or not we actually are racist. In fact, because of the results I just listed, this solution as a way to end institutional racism would accomplish the exact opposite. It makes no logical sense to think that the further subjugation of Black Adventists is the way to end racism in the Adventist Church. Desegregation without corporate repentance will lead to increased racial discrimination under the facade of racial unity. I personally want to end the segregated conference structure, but I don't think that's anywhere close to the first step in solving the issues in the denomination. In my opinion, ending conference segregation should really be the goal that we work toward through the hard work of addressing prejudice in ourselves. It's the final step in the transformative process of corporate and personal confession, repentance, and reconciliation. In order to reunify, I believe we need to make sure leadership and representation is improved for people of color, or at the very least maintained. Asking Black Adventists to give up all the things they created separate conferences for in the first place is not anti-racist. And doing so just so we can appear less racist? That's even worse. We also need to deal with some of the serious theological and cultural teachings that result in racist attitudes towards people of color through the demonization or outright rejection of aspects of their heritage. We need to take a genuine interest in their needs and desires as a community and as a part of our Adventist family, and we need to do more to ensure that racial prejudice has no place in local church-nominated leadership and membership. Desegregating without doing any of the work required to make the church safe is only an effort to make us feel better about racism in our own denomination by being able to pretend like it doesn't exist. So if you are using your platform to call for the end of segregated conferences, I challenge you to work toward making the rest of our churches and institutions a safe place for Black Adventists to call home. Don't just invite people of color. Make sure they are welcome in those spaces. One way that I am working to make this happen is to add racism to the church manual as a disqualification for local church leadership. This would give pastors and churches an effective tool to confront prejudice in their own congregations. As a denomination, we have some serious soul-searching, transformation, and education that needs to happen before reunification can be successful. And so to that end, I provided links in the description of this video so you can study for yourself the history of regional conferences and what role they play today. I hope that the content in this video has been helpful to you as you decide where you stand on these important issues. So thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and leave a thumbs up. And as always, enjoy some footage of my dog Sugar to help brighten your day.